Procedures for electronic meeting. Before we get started, welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting. All commissioners will be on video. Commissioners and staff will be asked to click raise hand when they wish to speak. The chair will call on individuals to speak. Commissioners and staff are asked to keep their microphones muted until called upon. Members of the public will be muted during presentations and commissioner discussion. For public participation, the public may join the meeting from a computer or dial in by phone. All public members are muted upon entry. To make a comment during public comment segments, if you're on a computer, click the raised hand button icon. It's either in the participant panel on the right of your screen or in the control panel at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You may have to hover over that area to see it. If you're on a phone, hit *9 to raise your hand. The chair will call on those with raised hands individually. You will be unmuted when called upon. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. So this is our historic preservation meeting for September 20th, 2021. And we will do a roll call, please.
Commissioner Berg.
Present.
Commissioner Clemmy. Here. Commissioner Dunlap.
Here.
Chair Haley.
Here. And then we have our minutes, our agenda for tonight. Looking at the agenda, does anyone have any changes? Otherwise, we can move to approve.
I'll move to approve tonight's agenda.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the agenda is approved. And then we have our minutes from our last meeting, August 16th.
I'll move to approve. I'll move to approve the minutes.
All right.
I'll second that motion.
All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right, the minutes are approved. And then are there any public comments that are not on our agenda this evening? Look at our participants or our attendees. I don't see anyone. So we'll move on to our public hearing. And this is for 501 Jefferson Avenue, and we'll have a staff report.
Thank you, Chair Haley. I'll share my screen and then begin. Can everyone see that okay? I'm guessing so, hoping so. Great. Just getting my notes ready here quick. So tonight before you is the first agenda, or our agenda item for this evening is 501 Jefferson Avenue. This is a request to approve a landmark, a request to approve an alteration certificate, and to approve a grant request for the property at 501 Jefferson Avenue. As you can see here, the subject property is located on the southeast corner of Jefferson Avenue and Hutchinson Street, outlined in sort of the white opaque box on the left-hand picture. And then the right-hand picture, the yellow star just indicates kind of generally where it's at within the context of Old Town there. For this photo, this is on the left. Both of these are from the 1948 assessors, the Boulder County assessors cards. The left-hand photo would be from the card itself taken at that time, and then the right would be just an outline from the card as well. So this would be just for clarification, which we'll get into as we talk about this more, but this was moved circa 1948, and so we know it was at least 1948 since it was a part of this Boulder County assessor card in this year. And so this picture would be from its relocation from the mine to here. So just for a little clarification there. For these two photos, this is your current condition. So what it looks like today, you can see some small alterations overall, but generally remaining the same in terms of its sort of physical appearance. There's that porch addition here. So just to give you some current photos. And so then to dive in, at first we'll review the application for landmarking, so Resolution 6, Series 2021. And listed before you would be the criteria for landmarking. They must be 50 years old, meet one or more of the criteria of architectural, social, or geographic significance. And then they should also meet one or more of the physical integrity criteria, which we'll get into as well. Oops. So for the to meet the 50 years old eligibility, the principal structure, we don't know its certain construction date, but we do know, again, because it was moved in at circa 1948, that it's at least, it's well over 50 years old, but would have been well before that 50-year criteria. It's on its current site for 72 years. So we do believe, staff does believe it, or feels it does believe that, staff does feel it meets that criteria. For architectural significance, staff finds that the style and integrity of the structure meets the criteria for architectural significance. And you can see here that it's a bungalow craftsman style and is indicative of other kind of worker era homes of the same time. And then the house is also associated with the historic development of Louisville, both Old Town and of mining related housing, as it was moved and then moved into Old Town. So kind of is both, or straddles both of those. For escape social significance, there we go. Staff does find that the former residents were noteworthy in the community and that the property meets the criterion for social significance. So as you can see from this slide, William Bill Leslie was born in Louisville right before the turn of the century, and then he worked at the Matchless mine before retiring from mining in 1941. Oops. Sorry about that. And then the lots where it is now located, 501 Jefferson is now located, have historic ties to both the Acme Mining Company as well as the Rocky Mountain Fuel Company. So some other social ties there as well. For physical integrity, staff finds that overall staff finds that the structure meets the criteria for physical integrity required for landmarking, as it's a bungalow style and embodies the character of the development of Old Town, as I mentioned, particularly in Louisville in the early to mid 1900s. So that's sort of craftsman style, and because it was also moved more than 50 years ago. Staff recommends that the structure be landmarked by approving Resolution 6, Series 2021, which will come all at the end as well. And staff recommends that the house be named for the Leslie family for its relation to Bill Leslie and his family, since they were the longest tenured after the structure was moved, and they have those historic mining ties. We'll also now move on to reviewing the application for the Alteration Certificate, which is Resolution 7, Series 2021. The applicant is also, as I noted, applying for an alteration certificate, and this request is to allow for rehabilitation work to replace the existing non-historic windows with new windows that would retain the overall style of the period and that would have been there historically, and then retaining the original openings. Oops, sorry, I want to talk a little bit about that image on the right. So you can see here, this is sort of a map of the request. So on the right-hand image, what you're seeing is sort of a site plan of the house. At the top there would be the front porch. So that would be kind of the front elevation of 501 Jefferson. And then the numbers surrounding match the windows that are proposed to be replaced. They also match the bid of the windows, or the construction kind of diagrams of the windows that were included in your packet. Roughly each one are typically characteristically the same in terms of how they would look from the exterior. They're each numbered a little bit differently as they're sized differently, their dimensions are different. But just to clarify, they would continue to remain in those historic and original openings. So this is for, this slide would go through the alteration certificate request criteria. So staff finds that the proposed design does either meets all criteria that are listed as we would set forth by our Louisville Municipal Code, or that the criteria would not apply to this particular project. And so on the right-hand side, you can just see this is one example criteria that I pulled out from that full list that was also in the staff report and in the packet. And so just to kind of give you a further clarification of how staff felt that this proposed or these new windows would meet that. So you can see in terms of, this is example C2 from the criteria, and you can see sort of outlining why staff meets, or why staff feels that this project would meet some of those criteria listed in our municipal code. So for instance, in this particular one, since this is a project proposing for windows, we do feel that the patterns and the openings are historically accurate, that the proportions of the frame and sash are historically accurate, the configurations of the windows panes as proposed would be appropriate for the time period, and then other details or like arches, right? There wouldn't be arches in this sort of, to meet the craftsman style, and they're not included in this. It meets what would typically be a historically craftsman style or bungalow style window. So just to kind of list that out a little bit further. So this photo here, is just an example on the right-hand side of a typical replacement. Again, each size will be a little bit different, but you can see here, this is from the packet, from the proposal for the grant itself. And so you can see what the window would look like roughly, but staff does believe that it meets the proposed window replacement would not result in any loss of the historic character, and therefore would approve or recommends approval of Resolution 7, Series 2021, which recommends approval for the alteration certificate. And then lastly for this, we will review the request for a grant, which is Resolution 8, Series 2021. And so the applicant is requesting a preservation and restoration grant in the amount of $7,436, which is matching funds, to be considered under Resolution 17 of Series 2019, which allows for matching grant amounts up to $40,000 for eligible projects of eligible preservation, restoration, and rehabilitation work. As you can see here on this slide, this just sorts of lists out what approved work would have to fall under in order to qualify for grant funds. So these are typical examples or general examples, but you can see here window replacement would be specifically listed within Resolution 17, Series 2019. And then this slide is to show you that just what the overall breakdown was. So what the project of the windows would be: the remove replacement windows and reinstall windows to match, and then the total fund would be up top. And so the matching grant request is there at the 7,000. So overall, after reviewing criteria for landmarking and evaluating the proposed alteration certificate and grant request, staff does recommend approval of Resolution 6, Resolution 7, and Resolution 8, Series 2021. And if I am here for any questions.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for staff?
I do not.
I guess my only question, which isn't really an issue, but I guess like we won't have an HSA, obviously, when we do the grant, so we won't know if there's any other pending larger projects potentially. It's a small grant, so they'll still have money left over. So I just want to kind of, I guess, more just point that out, I guess, with staff.
We actually do have an HSA for this
Oh, we
one. I
do.
marked
Okay.
541 on this, so that might be my fault, just confusing. But this is 501. They received a HSA, I believe it was in 2020, but we finalized it more recently.
Awesome.
And then we did review it. So there is one there, and so would have those kind of other deficiencies, but this is the first project that they'd be looking at. But that's an excellent question. Yep.
That's perfect. Thank you for clarifying that. That's great. All right. And is the applicant here tonight?
Yes, they are. We have Carolyn and Christopher Beam. Am I saying the last name right? Beam?
Beam, yeah.
All right. And if you will state your name and address for us, and if you'd like to speak with us, that's great. You don't have to, but if you'd like to say anything to us.
Go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, we just wanted to say, my name is Carolyn Ford, and this is my husband, Christopher Beam. And we just wanted to thank you guys very much for your consideration. We actually started this process in the very last meeting before the pandemic in 2020 in February. So we it's just been kind of biding our time. So Kim's been wonderful to work with. It's great to meet her. And to your point, we do have a couple of other pretty pressing projects that will be coming up. So you'll see us again. Probably the most important one is the one about fixing the structure of the roof. We don't have wide enough beams up there. And if anyone knows anyone who does that kind of work, we'd love to know, because we've been trying to find someone. We have had roofers up there and they walk on the roof and the solar and it just goes, it's very scary. And so we need to get that fixed soon. So we're going to be working on that, but it will involve removing the solar. And the question that we had is, when would the commission have a problem with us when we put the solar back? If we installed snow fences at the end of them, because part of the problem with this whole thing is that we've had avalanches coming off the solar, with the big snows, and it's really quite a big problem. And we didn't know if putting a snow fence would cause any kind of historical problem.
Is the snow fence, it just keeps the draft of snow off the roof, basically?
It keeps it on the solar so that
So
it
that-
melts slowly off, and so it doesn't all fall off at the same time,
Oh, okay.
crush everything that's below.
I got it. So it kind of sits at the bottom of the,
Yeah.
okay,
It holds it onto the solar, basically.
sure.
But it does change the appearance a little bit from the front.
Right.
However, if we do this correctly, we will be able to remove some of the gutters that are not historical, actually, and do different things with water. But we just didn't know if being able to see that snow fence from the front would be a problem.
Sure. And I don't know if we can speak to that specifically. I know one just piece of historical preservation is if it can be removed. So it's not a permanent structure. So the snow fence sounds like it wouldn't be permanent. But probably we'll just review that when it comes, and
Okay.
staff might be able to guide you a little bit better, especially once you kind of know like how big it is and maybe what it actually looks like from the front, that kind of thing. So that's not a very clear answer, but I think we can probably guide you along the way.
Okay, we just, before we started the process of getting all the quotes, if that was going to be a no, what's the
Right.
worry, but anyway, if that was not going to be a possibility at all, it would change kind of our plans going forward to get quotes, to get the stuff. So
Sure. And I guess first it might be a question of staff too. Is that even something we can address tonight since it's not actually, or can we kind of advise, or what's your take?
I think we would wait until it's kind of more specifically on the agenda, but to that point, I'm more than happy, I can follow up and then we can take a look at what ideas you might have, and I'm more than happy to kind of walk you through it, see if it looks good and guide you that way. I'm more than happy to do that for sure.
And staff Kim can also always assign a subcommittee to look at it. So there's two of us that can look at it with her to give you, wouldn't you agree with that? Just a kind of a good sounding board, so that it kind of cuts down on the timing as far as having to wait for another meeting. So
nice. Okay.
yeah, so just be in touch with Kim for any of your questions along the way, and she'll take care of you.
That's
Okay.
right. Yep.
Just, I just wanted to get an initial reaction if someone just had a horrified look. Then
No, it's a good question, and definitely, I mean, that's one of those hard, like solar panels on a historic home, like what do we do? So it's a good question.
okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank
And
you.
again, just thank you in general for considering us. We're really,
Yeah,
we've been waiting a year and a half for this, and we're very excited.
yeah, it's a long time to wait. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant?
Well, I'd have a comment about that, about the solar panels. There have been national level conversations about whether solar panels in general are compatible with historic preservation. And the general thought is that the environmental considerations of having solar panels and the like should have preference and be compatible with historic preservation. So I think in Colorado, to have those guards to keep cascades of snow from hitting people on the head is a good thing. So I would think in general, it probably isn't specifically stated in the interior guidelines, but is something we would want to approve.
Right. Yeah, and I agree. And I think there's probably we can just make sure that there's probably more sensitive ways and less sensitive ways as far as how to do that. So I think that's one of the things that will guide, because I think I agree. We are definitely in favor of solar panels. So yeah, that's a good insight. Does anyone have any questions specifically about the either the landmarking, the alteration certificate, or the grant for the applicant before we bring it back to the commission? All right. Thank you so much for being here this evening. And we are gonna see if there's any public comment before we bring it back. And is there anyone in the audience, in the public, that would like to comment on this? I don't see anyone. So we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. And then we'll just vote. Go ahead. No, you're good.
So Kim, yeah, it's funny. Kim, would you mind bringing up the pictures again?
Sure, yeah, the historic ones or the,
No, the current
thing.
ones.
you got it. Yep, let me just go back here. Let me share my screen.
So are the solar panels on the other elevation side? Because I was gonna say, I did not even notice.
I think they're on the east side of the building. So they are shown in
Or
some
the
of the other
south, is
pictures.
that the south side?
Sorry, I'm sorry,
We
south
don't
side.
have
They're in the, it was late.
Looks like they're
So
shaking their head, yes, on the south side.
yeah, they're on the south side. Some of the other pictures in the packet showed them.
Okay.
But from this view, which is both of these views, I think to me show the most kind of craftsman bungalow style. And right, I don't see them at all on these two images.
Right, yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Kim.
And so when we we can discuss all three. We'll just discuss them in order and then we'll vote in order as well. So first is landmarking. So 50 years or older, meets that criteria, has our architectural integrity, even though there's stucco and some window size changes, but overall integrity, architecturally for sure. And then social history, there's strong social history, even though it's moved, that's part of Louisville's history. So does anyone else have comments about the actual landmarking of the structure?
No, I'm comfortable with that. It meets more than one of our criterias for that. And like the little extra thing on the side, that's, it's that extra dormer thing
Dormer.
that
Mhm.
I don't think that affects the ability to landmark it. So,
And I
Okay.
think I would agree. I think the moving of the house is something that's done quite a bit in this area. It's I like that it has the picture of the Columbine mine in the museum history to show where it originated. In this particular style, we do see quite a few of around Louisville, so it kind of adds to the feeling of continuity and place in Louisville. So I think it meets all three criteria.
All right, do we want to go ahead and vote on that one then?
sure, I'll make a motion. So I make a motion that we approve Resolution 6, 2021 to landmark 501 Jefferson Avenue with the name Leslie House, if that's okay with the occupants.
All right, and I see nodding, so they're in agreement.
Second
All right.
that.
Did you second it, Gary?
I will second that, yes.
Okay. Sorry, I was, and we can get a roll call, please.
Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Clemmy,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. All right, so then we will talk about the alteration certificate, which is replacing the windows with or I guess similar style and size and original openings to the house.
Yeah, I think that's pretty amazing that
Mhm.
that over the years that nobody, I mean, maybe before, but at least since 1948, nobody thought to, expand or do whatever with the windows. That's awesome. That for them, it's just kind of a swap to hopefully windows that are like they're going to do historically accurate and same size, but hopefully maybe a little bit better for the homeowner for energy bills and whatnot. So it's exciting.
Yeah.
I have a question maybe for staff regarding this, and it's as the words Linda used, the windows are a similar style. And there is the use of the 3 lights over one double hung windows. And I know that that's historically accurate because that's what's in an old house at Pine and Lafarge today. one of the original houses and in old photographs. But do we have a guide to go for those? Because one of the other windows, I think, is a 6 lights over one. And while it looks also historically accurate, and I'm supportive of it, do we have a portfolio of what we would look at to be in similar styles for that time, or are we just sort of using our subjective judgment on that?
That's a good question. I don't know if there's necessarily a portfolio, that we would use specifically, or if there's sort of a portfolio that's out there in terms of, put out by the Department of the Interior that says it must be, these examples. But what we do have are a couple things. We do have, as I noted, Preservation Brief 9 is from the NPS, or from the National Park Service, and it's
Yeah.
about sort of standards and preservations. It's a
Yeah.
preservation brief, so they have a number of those. And that's about windows, and some of those criteria, how these windows match the criteria. That's one way we can look, but that's more general. It's more to the light, kind of what you just asked. Do the lights match? Is it 3/3 or 6/6 or whatever? So it's a little bit more general and more strictly, or almost like rehabilitation, but it does help. The other thing that we have that's really helpful for guidance, and not quite a portfolio, but is probably closer to it, would be books like Virginia McAllister's, A Guide to Architectural Styles. And so that's a book that preservation professionals and just folks use all the time to learn about styles. It writes, it details all sorts of styles from Queen Anne to modern, and depicts what we would call its character defining features, and windows are typically one of those. And so it would say, here are a bunch. Her book would say, here's the craftsman style, here's the variations of the craftsman style, here are typical windows or other character defining features that you would see in this style. And it does it for other styles, but since we're looking at craftsman, so it would say 3/1 is consistent with that sort of style, and it might give some examples. So again, it's not necessarily a portfolio, but those sorts of guidance helps us say, what's the period of time in which it was built? What is the general style, if it has one? So this one does. And so what sorts of windows would have met those two things, the year, the kind of the period of time, and then also what would have been typical of that style of building. And so if it were, like what that one slide said about arched windows, for instance, which was just given an example. If we saw arched windows here, that would go against what we typically see for craftsmen. So it's not quite as detailed as you might be asking about, but you can see how we kind of use those sources to say what works best for this style that's before us, and does the proposal, in this case windows, match that? Does that kind of make sense in that way?
Oh, it does.
Okay.
One thing, right now there's an effort to update the historic overlay for the residential part of Louisville, with a lot of surveys going on now. And it really touches on the use of materials in the Old Town part. I don't know if they will specifically create a section on materials, but materials and window styles like this may be a good appendix for a work like that. Not to specify that people must do those, but as a guideline. Would that make any sense to pass that on to those people in that effort?
We could see, and I'll certainly take a note about it. What I think also speaks to it too is, that's part of what we look at in terms of two things. Staff, when I'm writing my report for something like this, for a request like this, we look at those things: what materials were, what style, what materials were historic, and then also what would address that in some ways as well, which seems less direct. But the historic structure assessments that we receive, if we're looking at a grant, right, presumably we've seen a historic structure assessment, and so that can help us too, because it might say, this opening, we found a wood window behind, a wall that was blocked off, or, we see all these new windows, but there is one that's a wood window that's historic, or something to that effect. So it's a little, I'm getting a little away from your question, but those are just kind of other ways we can group it all together to get context to answer that question you're talking about as well.
Well, often we see the work that the museum staff has done to look at what the styles were, to compare a roof overhang to see if we saw other examples of that in Louisville or Boulder. And anyway, I don't know that they're all consolidated, so that there's a lot for anybody, people doing the HSA or staff or anyone to look at, to compare to. And it probably would be an advantage to have such an appendix in some document. Might pass that on to the people who are doing that overlay zoning work.
Great.
Okay, just a comment. I like these styles of the windows, we're not confused about that.
All right. So you
I
approve.
hadn't seen a 6/1 style, but it sure seems to fit.
All right. Do we want to does anyone make a motion on this resolution?
Yeah, I'll move to approve Series 7, 2021 for the alteration certificate for the restoration of windows at 501 Jefferson Avenue.
I'll second the motion.
And we'll do a roll call again.
Commissioner Clemmy,
Yes.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes,
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes. And then our final piece will be for the grant, which is just for the removal and replacement of the windows. And again, as we said, these are replaced with, trying to think of what to, like they're historically appropriate for the time period of the house with the 3/1 and possibly the 6/1. So, and so I think it sounded like we all agreed that they were appropriate replacements for this project. So, oh, and so the grant is for roughly 14, I'm sorry, the total is roughly like 14,000, and this would be a matching of 7. I don't have the exact numbers up.
Great.
7,436 for the matching.
Thank you. So that's the details of the actual grant. Does anyone have any questions or concerns about that?
And if I may just briefly, sorry to interrupt, but all the proposal replacement windows would be 3/1. I was just giving examples of other window types,
Oh,
but just to make sure, all would be 3/1 in this proposal.
okay.
thanks.
Okay. I just heard Gary say it was a 6/1. So there's an
One in the document there, it showed a 6/1, even though, as well as a 3/1.
okay.
The amount seems appropriate to me.
I agree. This is exactly what the matching grant is for, to
Mhm.
bring the outside back to its historical thing, but still make it workable for a homeowner in modern times.
Right.
So
And like I said, it sounds like there's still enough in their grant, like their total grant amount, that they can do other things like the beams or whatever if those are high priority items in the HSA. So it's a small amount compared to their overall grant that they have access to.
exactly.
All right. Would anyone like to make a motion on this one?
I'll move to approve Series 8, 2021 for the matching grant in the amount of $7,436 for the replacement of windows at 501 Jefferson Avenue.
I'll second the
Second that.
motion.
Okay.
All right. And we'll do another roll call, please.
Commissioner Dunlap,
Yes,
Commissioner Berg,
Yes.
Commissioner Clemmy,
Yes.
Chair Haley.
Yes.
Yay.
All right, yay! Celebration. All right, well, I hope this project goes well for you. And like I said, just stay in contact with Kim throughout this one. And then also as you have your upcoming projects, she's happy to answer any questions that come up along the way and help guide you so that there's no surprises or anything. So hopefully there's always surprises with older homes, but all right. Well, thank you for joining us this evening, and we look forward to working with you again.
Congratulations.
Landmarking your house.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I didn't raise my hand, but thank you.
Oh, you're fine.
Can I add one little thing just to clarify things? The one that looks like it's 6/1 is actually two 3/1s put together.
Oh, yes.
So it looks like, but so anyway, just to clear that up. Thank you guys
I
very
know
much.
which one he's talking about now. Yes, you're so welcome. Have a good night.
Thanks, you too. It's really
All right. It's always fun when there's excitement on the other side. All right, so we have items for staff as our next item.
Just sharing my screen again here to give some subcommittee updates. We just had one update for between our last meeting and this one, so it would be for 801 Main is what we saw in the last one. So it was demolition subcommittee. So the photo on the right hand, so the address is 801 Main. And then the photo on the right hand side, if you kind of zoom in or hone in on the ATM there, that was what the request was for. So the subcommittee did release a permit to replace the current ATM at 801 Main. And research did confirm that existing siding and window fill is not historic. Obviously, at some point that ATM existing was put in. And the proposed replacement ATM could also be removed at some point without damaging the historic features or general kind of makeup of the window section there or and that entry door area. So it wouldn't have any negative impact on the facade, so they did release it. And that is the only subcommittee we had for this month. And then I also have, just to move, I don't think I moved forward, but to give an upcoming schedule update, we do have 2 items there listed. So the next plaque ceremony, I think I've heard from everyone in the commission. It sounds like everyone can come unless I'm remembering incorrectly, would be the 30th. We'll start at 6:30 again, and I'm thinking we'll start at 6:33 Lafarge, but I'll make sure to confirm that beforehand. And then October 18th would be our next HPC meeting. At this point, we'll still work on that. It'll be virtual. I don't have any updates different from that. If something does change, I'll also let you know for sure. One thing to update you on that we'll do is the time to begin will be 6:30 as always, but just to give you just a little bit of update of what will be coming is we'll have a joint session at the beginning of the meeting once we start it with Planning Commission and the consultant that's been hired, Pelona Architects is their name, who've been working on that Old Town overlay. They have a sort of diagnostic report at this point. I know a lot of you were interviewed and did some of those kind of stakeholder interviews with them and have chatted with them, as have other groups, including Planning Commission. So they're going to kind of come with some of the information they've seen and report on at this stage where they're at. They're still accumulating information and doing research. And as you know, they've interviewed folks. So just so you know, we'll kind of talk through at the beginning of our meeting and then move on to sort of regular business afterwards. So nothing necessarily you guys have to do in terms of direct homework, or anything like that. But just so you have heads up and it's not a surprise. And that's all I have.
Kim,
Yes,
there was subcommittee discussion about 809 Main.
that's correct.
About a width of the front door to meet ADA requirements.
Yeah,
Did
we'll
that
actually.
not get forward enough to get the meeting?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we'll keep that just out of here for now, just since we haven't officially decided one way or the other on that. So that's a good
Okay.
question. And I know that you might have sent me an email, but I was on vacation until tonight.
Okay.
So sorry, I haven't gotten back to you, but we'll keep it out of the full commission and then we'll bring it to them if that's what we vote on, but I'll just keep it out here just for that.
That's good. And then are you going to do the HSA assessment? I'm sorry, HSA presentations?
Absolutely. And then just so I'm going to move, we do have Josh Johnston of DAJ here. So I'll do them as normal, but since they're both DAJ HSAs this time, he came on just in case you do have any follow-up questions for them. So once I'm done presenting, I'll kind of, if you have any questions, let me know. He's on the attendee list and I can let him talk. But yep, I do have those 2 follow-ups, which I'll do right now as I share my screen and prepare. So again, I know that these are still relatively new, so please let me know if you have any suggestions on how you'd like me to present them, if there's more information out of the HSAs or different information you'd like to know as we kind of circle back on them. And as a reminder, what we'll be looking at is 2 addresses tonight. The first you can see is 724, 728 Main. But just as a refresher, what we'd be looking at in this section are the historic structure assessments that have gone to probable cause, have been completed, and then sent to staff, reviewed, and approved as final. And so this isn't any sort of specific requirement, but I figured it's nice to, as a refresher, so you see them in between probable cause and potential landmarking. You have kind of a middle point to refresh and also see what the HSA had to say. So as always, this can change as you wish, as you'd like to see different information, but I'll just go ahead and get into it. So this is 724, 728 Main is the first one we'll look at tonight. This is one of 2. And then the probable cause, this one was approved in March of 2021. So that's when you originally would have seen it before you. The HSA report was done by DAJ, as I mentioned, and the structural engineer on the project was Glenn Frank. You can see on the left-hand side there is just kind of a highlight of where it is. So in between kind of Spruce and Pine on Main Street there is the general location. And then a little bit of history in that third bullet point is for about 35 years, the building was the site of the Twin Light Tavern, an extremely popular bar, and there was food and dancing and that sort of lively, fun times there. It had its heyday during World War II, and then the period afterwards, and then the building at 724 Main served as a men's barbershop for 68 years, among other sort of commercial uses as well. As a reminder too, we kind of look at what's maybe changed, which are part of the HSA requirements. So when people submit the HSA, one of the things we ask for, or the requirement, the scope of work asks for, is to say, what has changed over time? And so what is before you is sort of a color-coded visualization of that. So you can see just some examples there. For instance, in the red would have been circa 1880 to 1890, and then all the way to the yellow, which is in the kind of the back right or middle corner there, which would have been basement access, kind of probably later, but still unknown. So you can kind of see the color-coded, what it would have looked like, some of the additions over time. For this particular address. And then the scope of work provided as a template for structure assessments includes a requirement to have a preservation plan at the end, which includes things, for instance, of prioritized work. And that's where it would list out and denote and also highlight any sort of deficiencies. Typically, the HSAs, or not typically, but it is required by our scope of work of the HSAs to list what would be critical deficiencies or lesser deficiencies. So that would be things that really need to be looked at. For instance, a foundation could be one of those, right? Or something else could be, something less literally and figuratively foundational to the building. So it kind of goes from that. We request that as part of the review and part of the HSA itself. And so, for instance, in the example of this one, 724, 728 Main, you can see I have before you some of the critical prioritized work of the property would include, they listed it as based on the usage of the building, the foundation support systems should probably be looked at by a structural engineer. And then also that second bullet point, the floor framing should be reviewed by a licensed engineer as well. So that could be, these are things that are in the HSA. So folks who get them and request them have those to read through and potentially guide them in potential grant projects. And so that was 724, 728 Main. Similarly, to go through 928 Lafarge, which is the second one we have this evening. This probable cause was also approved in March of 2021. You can see there on the left-hand side, its rough location, or its highlighted location, I should say. This report was also done by DAJ, and the structural engineer was also Glenn Frank. And 928 Lafarge is a little bit of jog of the memory, was the home of the Antonio and Libra Porta family, so one of our Porta homes in town, who for at least 49 years, and Libra Porta was a midwife who delivered many babies and certainly had strong ties to Louisville's Italian heritage as well. For the general changing or, changes over time, you can see here again, another color-coded example. So on the right-hand side, that bullet pointed list would shows you some of the different changes. So the one-story addition, for instance, in orange there on kind of the top left-hand side would have been pre-1948 as they delineated it in the HSA. And so you can see some of the other changes. So definitely some changes over time at this one. If you do remember, this is the historic structure assessment we looked at. They're already landmarked, and then we looked at their historic structure assessment, and so there were some changes over time, but certainly meets the criteria even with newer additions. Same thing, just listing out what the prioritized work might look at. So there's critical deficiencies, serious deficiencies, and minor deficiencies as listed in HSAs. And so to give you some examples of this particular HSA's listing of critical or high priorities, so removing the vinyl siding from the entire house to bring back that kind of sort of original wood finish, and newly painted wood lap siding. And then for the serious or medium, so this would be a different priority level, they noted that the crawl space wall should be observed by licensed engineers and repair as needed. And so these are just a few. Typically, or almost always in HSAs, there's a good number under each of under critical, under serious, and under minor. These are just a few kind of I've pulled out for examples of the presentation itself, but these aren't all inclusive of what's listed in the HSA itself. And so that's kind of what I have. Those are brief, just those kind of 3 slides on each one. But just to bring them back to you, and like I said, if you ever have any requests for changes or additional information, I'm more than happy to do that as well.
Did these two have a structural engineer there? Because I saw that last one, it talked about a licensed engineer looking at the crawl space. Is that not a structural engineer?
Yeah,
That's
so
different?
they would be, from my understanding, and actually it's great Josh is on, he could talk about it a little more. I know that they do have engineers come out, so I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but I'll allow Josh to talk and see if he can speak to that a little bit better than I can. And
Okay.
Josh, if you unmute, you should be able to come on board if you can hear us.
Yeah, this is Josh Johnston. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And with DAJ Design, 922A Main Street. We do have a licensed structural engineer, that's Glenn Frank Engineering, join us at some point during the site visit. And those recommendations that you're referring to are their recommendations. And basically, we're looking at the whole house and giving more general indications as far as what's needed, but based on time constraints, in doing houses of this scale, they can't go in and specify each individual structural item and say, this one needs to be repaired, this one, it's getting a little bit more detailed. What they can say in the instance of 928 Lafarge is that this column is bearing on soil that has been compromised because it's been dug around, or those types of things, without saying, getting too specific, without getting like a soils engineer involved, or things along those lines.
Sure.
Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep, that makes total sense.
Yeah, so they're just taking a stab at it, but they're not saying exactly what needs to be done and how it should be done. It's just that they've noted that the crawl space in the wall's not looking great. Somebody needs to dig deeper and, right? That's kind of the gist.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, right. Their general analysis without digging too deep. And for instance, with the other two, 724 Main and 728 Main, they're noting the size of the structural members for the flooring, and based off of their knowledge, members of that size and that spacing and those spans cannot support the weight of a commercial structure. And so they're making note of that. However, they're not, I guess, hired to say, here's what needs to be done, or specifically, we need this size members to remediate that.
Right.
All right, thank you very much for clarifying that.
Yes, thank you.
So no, Kim, I liked your presentation. I thought it was, the packets obviously had everything, but your presentation was spot on. It kind of refreshes us, when we saw it, and, the social significance and stuff, and then just giving us the bullet points of some of the major things that were found in the HSA, so that, if we see it, come before us, we won't all be like, oh yeah, we knew that one had foundation issues, or, oh yeah, we knew the crawl space was probably gonna, require some funding. So that's perfect. I liked it.
Yeah, it's just nice to see them again. I feel like they've always just kind of gone out, and we never, obviously DAJ has done a really good job of bringing theirs back to us, but those are the only ones that we really see. So, and it's great to have a staff perspective on it, as far as the presentation too. So I think it's really helpful.
I do have somebody asked about the presence of the structural engineer. And we've had discussions in the past that we thought the HSA could or should include the structural engineering because it affected the later costs that might be involved in preservation or rehabilitation. But it's a little vague. It's that structural engineers were involved in both projects, but they didn't proceed to have a report or any, or maybe a report is, yeah, there's something there, but it's not really, maybe they can't do a full assessment of the structural engineering of the new structure until it's designed. But it's a sort of vague how much we're paying for in the HSA in terms of structural engineering. Does somebody walk in and say, yep, that's a structure, or as opposed to really doing the physics of what it's going to take to make this structure be preserved. So I don't know. That's kind of follows on to what we've had in the past about what an HSA entails. It's a little vague.
But don't, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought at this point, yeah, that's, we know the crawl space, for example, in the second structure we looked at, yeah, the structural engineer in the HSA went through the house and it's noted these things, but it's not until the applicant comes forward looking for grant money that we actually say, okay, so who have you talked to? What are the numbers going to be, right? Isn't that the stage where we get more specific with asking, okay, you're putting your grant application together. What do we think the numbers are going to be? How are they going to fix it? Ergo, that's how much it's going to cost. Like, we have to build the whole wall again, or no, we can shore it up, or whatever. Isn't that how it works?
That's right. And to kind of touch on that too from a broader point of view for the HSAs in general. So to back up, I know it sounds like I'm not answering it, but I will. So to back up, generally the HSAs we follow, or we ask whoever does them, so in this case DHA or whomever else it might be, to follow the scope of work that we've provided. And so they follow the list, and that's kind of how they create the report. And so in general, we also request, because we follow the state, that typically it would be that HSAs in general are overseen by an architect or a structural engineer under the guidance of an architect. So why I bring that up is generally we do at this point at the HSA stage want that kind of architect's point of view from it. And then we do bring in the structural engineer. So there are, and particularly DHA, typically when Glenn Frank is who they seem to use most often, or who I've seen at least, Glenn Frank does provide a written narrative report at the end of the HSA in general as sort of an addendum to everything else that DHA, in this case, using tonight's examples as an example. And so there is a structural kind of components written in throughout the HSA, but then there's that the structural engineer themselves provides a narrative, what they've found letter at the end. I know it's a little confusing probably with the nuance, but in terms of what the scope of the work for the HSA is. That's why the structural engineers typically don't go as far, kind of what Josh was saying, and Josh, let me know if I'm misquoting you here, but as they wouldn't go as far as that's kind of not the scope. That would be kind of, as then Commissioner Clemmy notes, kind of at a later point in time. So certainly not every HSA has to have them, but when they're involved, they usually always bring something into the HSA, whether it's incorporated totally, or in this case, Glenn Frank provides that kind of addendum report. So there is their direct voice in the HSA that would be included as we see. And so I typically, I'll review them and read them and see that in there, and then that's how they kind of get finalized.
Okay.
Well, I guess we wouldn't expect the structural engineer report at that point to include everything that would be needed to, say, support a second story if that were added on a structure. Quite a bit of detail there. But one of the hopes we had earlier was that an HSA might help us determine or project what the costs might be for the a grant for doing rehabilitation on a structure. And I guess maybe is that too much to expect from an HSA?
This is a good question too. I mean, how we do it or how they kind of come to it as somebody who gets hired to do the HSA, they're following the questions we give them and through the scope of work. So, the HSA is then the kind of it answers all the questions we put out there, and we've copied all of that. Our kind of scope of work that we request them to follow and I review and approve is directly from the state. And that's not to say, the state is perfect and we would like to do something different and that meets our needs a little bit better, but they just to kind of answer it in the sense, they do have particular questions that they review. And so that's kind of where their answers come from. And that's what makes up the report, if that makes sense. So we could certainly, my point being to continue the metaphor, we can ask other questions for them to answer, but typically they follow the structure of the scope of work pretty much to the T. And then that's where we get the report that they submit to us.
Yeah, the state doesn't provide funding like we do with this program.
They do. There are grants available for the state too. It's just we provide them and then we have them for our uses here.
And Gary, are you saying you'd like them to actually give amounts of how much they think that would cost, or just more detailed? Is that,
well?
I'm just trying to clarify.
That would be ideal, of course, but I don't know that that's really possible. There may be steel involved in
Right.
The buildings on Main Street or something like that would be beyond where they're at for now. But on the other hand, we aren't providing funding for an HSA that includes structural engineering assessment that has no input from the structural engineering standpoint. So I guess we're a little vague on what we're expecting. So what we get is a little vague.
And maybe too, maybe it'd be helpful if Kim let you see the actual write-up that Glenn Frank wrote, because that might, it sounds like that is pretty detailed if I'm understanding Kim correctly, because obviously what she gave us is just a succinct synopsis of what the whole report was, but the actual report that they submit should be really detailed. So that might be actually helpful, just so that we know what it actually looks like. If we can, would that be helpful, Gary, just to actually see physically what they submitted?
I think that's may well be in the notes.
Yeah, that Glenn
Frank's
Frank's Glenn Frank had a report in one of them.
Right.
You can see it in the packet if you wanted to reference that. I guess I felt okay about it because I know the commercial building, and maybe Kim, you could always just pull out all the critical stuff instead of a sample. But yeah, we know that building's going to have flooring issues. We know that. The other one's going to have a crawl space issue, right? Then we know from our applicants tonight, after their HSA, the beams, they told us, yeah, they have roof issues, right? So I feel okay, we have a pretty good idea, what kind of major things we'd be
Mhm.
looking at ahead of time.
Right.
But maybe your report, Kim, could include all the critical ones, just bulleted out, like the floor, the roof, the foundation, or whatever. I don't know.
Absolutely. I can add more information for the next time we look at them and kind of list it out.
Yeah, and the report that we have included in our packet does show all that. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I think obviously we can't give actual amounts because things are changing constantly, but also there is just more, depending on what they're even going to do at this point. There's, you know, kind of there's a lot of work that has to go into figuring out crawl space, for instance. Like that's a big project, just trying to figure out what exactly is going on, that they might not even mess with if they ended up not doing anything. So you know what I mean? So I can see that from the applicant point of view, as far as not going into all that detail until they have to, as far as hiring a structural engineer for more of the specific nitty gritty parts of it. But I think we do have a pretty good understanding of anything that's foundational is pretty significant as far as the scope of work and cost and everything. So
I really wasn't questioning what this engineering firm did.
Right.
But in general, what should we expect from an HSA that we fund? And I guess we leave it pretty open-ended.
so you do feel like this was done well?
Yeah, it looked like it. I mean,
Okay.
I didn't dig into all of the
Okay.
the detail, but it looked like at least there was an engineering effort. But
Okay.
the amount of work done or the amount of detail is a little open-ended. Yes. I don't know. Maybe we can improve that in the future. We have had talk of updating the HSA. Maybe we even did. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that can definitely, I mean, that's an ongoing discussion, and I think that's exactly why staff is doing this, just to make sure that we are catching everything. So it's a good discussion. That's what it's for. So those are good points to bring up. And if any of us feel like we're not as thorough, or it's too open-ended or too loose or whatever, like that's exactly what we need to figure out. So yeah. So it's good feedback. And then also, I guess too, like just making sure that I guess, Gary, like specifically for these, like, do you feel like this had enough detail, or does staff need to get more, you know, those kind of things too? So, because I thought you were saying maybe this one didn't have enough detail, but it sounds
I
like,
see.
so that's one of those things too, just to make sure we all clarify, like, you know, because there are a lot of, we do have a lot of questions as far as, are we getting what we paid for, all those kind of things.
That's it.
So just making sure that we know if we're talking specifically about one of these HSAs, or if we're just kind of talking in generality. So yeah.
It was just more the general comments on both presentations that it needed further structural engineering work.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what that actually means. Yeah. Okay. All right. And obviously DAJ was here tonight, so they can hear this discussion too and help us through it next time. So, all right. Is that all from staff? It looks like that's the last of our items from staff.
That's right, just those two HSAs tonight.
And I wasn't trying to hurry you along. I thought maybe you, when you did the items for staff, I thought you were going to keep going. And so anyway, I didn't realize.
No, probably, I didn't have the agenda in front of me, so I should have
Okay.
had it, so then I would have known to just flow through. So yeah.
Okay. Thank you. All right, and for item 8, updates from commission members, we have an update on the historical commission meeting. So that's Commissioner Berg.
So
Was it you this time, or was it Keith?
it was Commissioner Heller.
Okay.
Yeah, I rotate, and he attended the last one.
Sure.
So perhaps we can push that to the next agenda.
We can move it. That's great. All right, any other updates from anyone that's not on the agenda?
I have a question maybe. We had talked about before of having in the staff notes section, basically a table or some way of keeping track of the work in progress, what things were before us. And I noticed that particularly since I missed last month's meeting and there was a discussion of our outreach project and what buildings might be included in that coloring book. I realized I don't have any way to know what that is, or does the public, since we're not really consolidating those notes in anything that's reachable from the HPC part of the website. And we had agreed that we do that in the past. So that might be something to, resurrect.
And the public does have access to all the meeting notes, all the
Right.
agendas, I mean, so all of the information is in there. So,
But not say specifically what were recommended as structures.
oh, because it was just a discussion. I see what you mean.
Yeah,
Did we not have it listed specifically?
only that high level item.
Okay.
But more to the point, that sometimes where we talked about what was going on with the status of different landmarking efforts, things that were under consideration. Yeah.
So maybe items from staff should always just include like we do updates from commissioners, just updates on ongoing projects. And right, and then
Yeah.
Need to
Kim
have,
can
like,
just
an
say, yeah, like right now, like Kim did, it just wasn't, maybe as official that we participated in interviews and surveys, and that project for overall the city is still going. Just a sentence about the coloring book, we're at this stage, additional outreach, none. I don't know, something just quick like that. That can kind of keep it, or still pending discussion about
Yeah.
HSA questions, or still pending discussion about, I don't know, the million of other things that we've talked about. Right?
You're saying, Andrea, put it actually in the agenda, just be more specific and have it all laid out. Is that what you're saying in the
Well,
agenda?
yeah, just maybe have it a part of staff updates, like staff updates us always on the schedule. Staff always updates us on subcommittee work, right? So maybe just a staff update section on ongoing discussion items, or side projects. I don't outreach projects. I don't know, other things that we're doing.
Right.
Maybe just just so that like Gary says, it's like, oh yeah, we do
Always
need
there.
to circle back around to that at some meeting. We need to circle around about that, about some, would that help, Gary, do you think?
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Okay.
So that we know that there is still, I mean, it's a valid comment each month that there was no progress on that particular item, but.
Absolutely, but we don't lose it.
Right.
Yep.
And we meant to talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things was mentioned kind of in passing was the HSA content, and we did discuss that. I'm not sure we got closure on it though. You know,
Right,
that sort of thing.
yeah, we don't have a subcommittee that specifically dedicated to looking at the HSA and the questions that we ask and the questions the state asks,
Mhm.
or, you know, what the state does, you know, where we go, where we differ, and do we want to, you know, be more specific or less specific or change ours? Like, you know, that would be a perfect in my mind, that would be a perfect subcommittee work to do, right? But you're right, Gary, if we don't see that if we don't touch on that every meeting, then yeah, 2 years goes by and we're like, oh yeah, we did,
Right.
we were thinking about that, you know, because we do talk about a lot of stuff every
Mhm.
So would
every
it
month.
be, so as far as finding a place for it, would it be helpful to have like a memo, like that staff always has, because where it's just a reoccurring, it's always there and she just updates it as needed, where it's, we always know, like in the staff items, there's gonna be where we can click on the link and see the memo where it has all of the line items of everything that we need to talk about or that hasn't been resolved or that kind of thing.
Right,
So it's the same document every time and it just changes as needed.
yeah. Mhm.
Would that be helpful? Would that be possible, staff?
More work for them.
I know. Well, hopefully if it's just the same document and it can just be edited as
Just-
needed.
Yeah,
But that way we all know where it is in every agenda and it's a work in progress. So from month to month, we can see things come off or get added.
yeah.
Just a
Or just,
placeholder.
yeah,
And wasn't there, didn't staff create a document like that last spring that sort of listed a lot of these action items that the committee was working on? I recall seeing a document similar to that.
Yeah, I think we did see that one meeting, but if we just had that linked in every single agenda, it maybe would
Right.
we'd remember.
Mm-hmm.
I can do that, not a problem.
That'd be great. Thank you very much.
Awesome.
And when appropriate, that document then might have links to other detailed information such as the HSA as we now are discussing it, or the outreach project as updated with the list of structures that we want to are considering for inclusion in the coloring book,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Mhm.
That could get out of hand, but there are some basic things that it would be good for us to keep an eye on, and the public.
Right.
Sure.
Okay, thanks.
Absolutely.
One more comment, Gary, with the coloring book, we
Yes.
did in one of the recent meetings list all of the specific structures that were being considered.
That was a month ago, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was last month or 2 months ago. So that information is in the minutes. Every house by landmarked house by name, all the commercial structures, all of those. So if you are interested in seeing what those are, we did lay all those out.
Well, I thought there was a discussion in last month's minutes, and it didn't say which one, but yeah, I do recall an earlier list,
Okay.
a proposed list. It sounded like you had some discussion that narrowed it down to a more in the list, but there wasn't any way to see what that was. No, anyway, I could probably ask you
Yeah.
what it was.
Yeah, and we can look back at that agenda too and just see if where it is too. So show it to you if if it's there. So
Okay.
yeah. And I think we had discussion to kind of whittle it down the last time we talked about it. And then this past one, I think they had kind of got the final. So it was a little bit of comments, but we didn't change anything. So
Okay.
yeah, so it was
All right.
more of just,
Maybe that was it.
yeah, so it was more of just, yeah, we agree, that's good. Maybe why'd you do this one versus that? Okay, that sounds good. So that was kind of the discussion. It wasn't a whole lot of back and forth
Yeah.
or deliberating or anything.
Yeah.
So but we'll get that information to you just so you can see it.
Thanks.
So sure. All right. Any other updates or suggestions? All right. And our last item is to adjourn. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Make a motion to adjourn tonight's meeting.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. Thank you. Have a good night.
Okay,
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.